A contentious figure who split the nation, admired and detested in equal measure. Charles J. Haughey has died at the age of 80. Hello there, you're welcome to the programme. We'll have all the day's news ahead, but first, he cast a long shadow over Irish politics and was arguably one of the most able yet polarising figures of his generation. Charles J. Haughey, who has died aged 80, is a man with a mixed legacy. A huge figure who played a significant role in national politics for 35 years, commentators say his legacy was never as dark as his detractors might suggest and never as shining as his admirers might say. First elected to the Dáil in 1957, he served as a TD until 1992, and that included 4 ministries between 1961 and 1979. He then became Fianna Fáil's 4th leader, and despite serving as Taoiseach for 3 terms, he failed 5 times to win an overall majority. Charles Haughey is credited with transforming the economy and having great foresight in many of his political decisions, more of which we'll hear about later, but his achievements were overshadowed later in life with the revelations about his financial and personal life. But first, Charlie Bird has this report on today's events and details of a state funeral to be held on Friday.
After the announcement of his death, flowers began to arrive. A number of local people placed floral tributes outside his home. The remains of Charles Haughey leaving his Kinsale home this lunchtime for a nearby funeral home where his body was embalmed. The former Taoiseach died at his Abbeyville residence shortly before 10 o'clock this morning. His wife Maureen and his 4 children, Emer, Kieran, Sean and Connor, were reportedly at his bedside when he passed away. Earlier at around 9 o'clock, his brother Father Owen Haughey administered the last rites to the ailing former Taoiseach. Shortly after the announcement of his death, flowers began to arrive. A number of local people placed floral tributes outside his home. One card read, "The boss, simply the best."
He'll be missed, and it'll all leave him quiet now. Let him rest in peace.
President McAleese, who is cutting short her visit to Africa for the state funeral on Friday, was among the first to pay tribute to Mr. Haughey.
I want to offer the deepest condolences on my own behalf and on behalf of the Irish people to his wife, to Maureen, and to his children, to Emer, to Sean, to Kieran and to Connor, and to his grandchildren, and to all those who loved him and who will miss him very, very, very dearly.
The current Taoiseach Bertie Ahern also paid tribute to Mr. Haughey.
Any fair historian looking at the analysis of 3.5 decades will come down that Charlie Haughey, as a European, as a local politician, as a national politician, was a great, great leader. And for all of us who served under him, the boss was a good person, and we're sad to see him gone.
Mr. Haughey's children, Emer, Sean and Kieran, left and returned to Abbeyville during the course of the day. Late this afternoon, the remains of Mr. Haughey returned to his home. On Thursday morning, the former Taoiseach will make his final journey from Kinsale. First to the local church in Donecarney, where he will lie in state. The state funeral will take place on Friday morning. Charlie Bird, RTE News, Kinsale.
Provoked, generating passionate loyalty and enmity, admiration and detestation. Born Castlebar, 1925, reared Dublin, educated St. Joseph's CBS Fairview, Joey's, schoolmate of George Colley of old Fianna Fáil stock. They both rose rapidly within Fianna Fáil, Charlie marrying Maureen, daughter of Taoiseach Sean Lemass. But Jack Lynch beat both of them to the top. Haughey, by then the youngest finance minister in Europe, bided his time, and he seemed certain to succeed Lynch until Northern Ireland erupted. In 1970 he was sensationally sacked from cabinet and charged with conspiracy to import arms. Ultimately cleared of all charges, he called on Jack Lynch to resign. Fianna Fáil held firm behind Lynch, and Haughey spent the next 5 years in the political wilderness, where he cultivated substantial grassroots support. By 1975, he was back on the Fianna Fáil front bench. 1979, after 2 by-election defeats, Lynch suddenly resigns. This time Haughey was ready and narrowly defeated Colley to become leader of Fianna Fáil and Taoiseach at a stroke.
As a community, we are living way beyond our means.
He began impressively, then unaccountably shirked tough decisions on the economy. There followed a period of unprecedented political instability, with 3 general elections in the space of 18 months. When the dust settled, he was back in opposition. Election 87, Charlie was back as Taoiseach and finally confounded his critics by dealing firmly with the economic crisis. June 89, Haughey calls a snap election, but the outcome is disastrous, a hung Dáil. Then sensationally, he abandoned so-called Fianna Fáil core principle to enter into coalition with former arch-enemies, the PDs. The presidential election of 1990 triggered the final slide. For the first time, Fianna Fáil failed to secure the presidency. Then finally, former Justice Minister Sean Doherty delivered the coup de grace.
One of the methods that was decided upon is the telephone tapping your phone, and anybody else that says otherwise or tries to abandon himself or herself from that situation is not telling the truth.
Not even the great survivor could weather such a damning disclosure. After he stepped down, the mystery of how he acquired his wealth began to unravel. A succession of tribunals produced dramatic revelations of how his opulent lifestyle was supported by huge personal donations from prominent businessmen and financial institutions. Also uncovered were secret Haughey accounts involving more millions in offshore locations. It all amounted to public disgrace of a kind unparalleled in modern Irish history. To the end, however, he remained unbowed, unflinching, and in his own terms, undefeated. Charlie.
Well, tributes were paid to the former Taoiseach from across the political spectrum, as well as from friends and supporters throughout the country. Nowhere more than in his adopted hideaway of Ondangan in Kerry. Immediate reaction from Leinster House was dominated by sympathy for the Haughey family.
We must all empathise with the situation they're in and feel for them. The fact that he was such a public figure makes their grieving, I think, all the more difficult because it is very much a public event. And I think that's always more difficult for families in these situations.
Whether in government or in opposition, whether you liked his statement, whether you agreed with it or whether you didn't, it was a statement that could never be overlooked.
He was a politician of immense talent. I think it's to be regretted that he didn't always apply those talents to public service.
He had an ability to dig a hole for himself, and he also had an ability to dig himself out of a hole.
Some will remember him fondly. More will hold a jaundiced view of his stewardship.
But he always has a dry sense of humour. I know he came back to us at one stage and said, right lads, I've looked at all the issues that you're interested in, and I can come most of the way with a lot of them for you. But for Jesus' sake, I can't nationalise the effing banks.
He was a very formidable opponent, and we had many battles on the floor of Leinster House. He gave as good as he got, but I have to say that when we left the chamber, we both took it in the spirit it was meant to be taken in.
As Taoiseach, he was very heavily involved in the North. It was right at the top of his agenda, and a great deal of the work, and this is natural with the Prime Minister, was very private. You couldn't be making public statements every day, but I was fully aware that he kept in regular contact with me, and he would support very strongly any suggestions that I would put to him to bring about peace in the streets.
He was a great man to chat people up, and it didn't matter whether he was a fisherman, a footballer, a golfer, a rugby player, a tourist. It didn't make any difference. Charlie Haughey could speak all languages to all people and could communicate with them.
Before assuming the office of Taoiseach, Charles Haughey held a number of key ministerial portfolios. Although praised for introducing wide-ranging and innovative policies in health, finance and the arts, his subsequent public disgrace helped to undermine many of those achievements. Martina Fitzgerald now looks back at the legacy of Charles Haughey.
I have done the state some service. They know it. No more of that.
Charles Haughey's legacy is very evident in the heart of Irish government. Some 20 years ago, he gave the go-ahead for the £18 million refurbishment of government buildings, known popularly at the time as the Chas Mahal. It's big, it's brash, and billions of euro go through the financial institutions here every day. But until the late 80s, the International Financial Services Centre was an area of warehouses, a failure as a living area and a wasteland. In 1987, Charles Haughey championed an idea put forward by businessman Dermot Desmond, which led to the major financial hub that exists here today.
I was always very fond of him. I was only kind of young when he would have been in power at first, but he always seemed to be like a very good leader and obviously did a lot around here.
I don't know very much about Charlie Haughey himself, but if he's responsible for this area, I've gotten my education in this area. I went to National College of Ireland, and I'm now working at Bank of Ireland just down the road, so an education and a job, so it's pretty good.
He gave the go-ahead to the IFSC, also the college I went to, DCU, he also gave the go-ahead for that, turned it into a big college now, so I have to, I suppose, give him credit for that as well. So he's done a lot of good things, but at the same time, there's a lot of scandal about him, so.
Charlie Haughey will also be remembered for sanctioning the rejuvenation of Temple Bar as a cultural quarter. But in the heart of Dublin's left bank tonight, many young people were not aware of his contribution.
I actually don't know much about Charlie Haughey at all. It's probably because what he did was before I was born, 1980s. My friends don't know much about him because he was in power before they were born, most of them.
But in the galleries and art houses of Temple Bar, Charles Haughey is fondly remembered.
Temple Bar is home, as you know, to the Irish Film Institute, the ARC, Project Art Centre, some very iconic buildings that needed an intervention at a time when things were tough. And Charlie Haughey's, I think, his vision and his imagination really came into play back in the late 1980s when he sanctioned the regeneration of Temple Bar as a cultural quarter.
Charlie Haughey also sanctioned the refurbishment of Dublin Castle for Ireland's presidency of the EU in 1990. Ironically, he would spend many days here giving evidence to the McCracken and Moriarty tribunals regarding payments from businessmen. Martina Fitzgerald, RT News, Dublin Castle.
With some other news now, and the government has said it views with the gravest concern the failure of the United States authorities